Once in a while, you need a recipe for a potluck or a big family dinner, and today is the day that we're going to do one. This one is called antique broccoli, and what I've done is take a recipe, a standard recipe, and make several modifications to reduce the total fat content and make it a more nutritious recipe. It's also convenient, and it uses the produce that you've grown during the summer. What we have here is about 2 pounds of frozen broccoli spears and 1 pound of frozen carrots. And just thaw those out so that they're going to cook fairly well. You can put them in the microwave and just cook them about half the time that you normally would to get them done, just to get them thawed out. And then spread them out in a pan. Also to this, I've got 10 ounces or a 15-ounce can, whichever you come across, of pearl onions, or you could cook some of your own. You could also, if you don't want to invest in it this way, you could very easily go ahead and cut up some onions and break them up a little bit. Well, I've got these in a 9x13 pan that I've got sprayed with some nonstick vegetable spray, and we're just going to try to spread those out so that none of them are sticking up particularly high, and they're spread out fairly well so that there's a fairly even distribution and nobody gets all the onions and nobody gets all the broccoli. Now, also with this, we're going to make a white sauce. Now, the original recipe called for 4 tablespoons of butter. And so what I've done in order to make a change is reduce that to 3 tablespoons, and instead of butter, I'm using canola oil. And that's going to not reduce the fat content dramatically, because this is going to make a lot of servings. It makes about 10 servings. But it will change the form of that fat, and so you'll have less cholesterol, and you'll have less saturated fat in this as well. So it becomes a more nutritious dish as we go along. Now, I'm making a roux, and when you make a roux, you combine the fat, and I've got it warming up here. I've got the 3 tablespoons of fat, and to that I'm going to add 1/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour. And I'm going to cook that in order to eliminate the raw flour taste. Now, there are different amounts of cooking that can be done when you make a roux, but whichever way you do it, you need to cook and stir over low heat, and you need to stir it continuously. What we want to happen is for the fat particles to completely coat the flour particles so that when we add our liquid later, there's less chance of lumping. The other thing that's going to be happening here is that we're going to have the flour is going to lose its raw flour taste. Now, there are different theories on when this can be done, and I'm kind of using a combination of the two. This one, I'm cooking the fat ahead of time for about 3 to 4 minutes and making a white roux. If you cook it longer, the longer you cook it, the less thickening power it will have. But that will eliminate some of the raw flour taste. Some people do it the other way around. They don't cook this very much. They just get it fairly well blended. And then they add the liquid to it, and then they bring it up and thicken it, and they'll let it cook for a little while afterwards, and that thickening at that point, that cooking afterwards, will also help eliminate some of that taste. The longer you cook this, as I said, the less thickening power it will have, but the more flavor it's going to have too. But since I'm making a white sauce, I'm not going to cook it for 15 minutes like if I was making some Cajun recipe, because I don't want to color the dish a lot. So this will just take about 3 minutes, and then we'll add the liquid. All right, you can see that we've got some color change here. It's no longer as white as it once was. I'm going to take it off the heat, because there's one thing as you add the liquid. If you add liquid, you need to add cold liquid to a hot roux or hot liquid to a cold roux. Otherwise, you get a lot of lumping. But whichever way you do it, you need to take it off the heat and blend it in. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of lumps. And you can see we have some lumping here, but it's going to even out. We're going to let it cook slowly, and I'm going to keep whisking, and that's gradually going to eliminate the lumps for us. The other thing I'm going to add to it at this point is just a little bit of black pepper. Now, if you are a purist, you could add white pepper to that. I tend to pretty much go with what most people are apt to have on hand and what is most easy for most people across the state to get a hold of. And so I'm just going to use black pepper, which hopefully most of you are going to have in your cupboards as part of your normal cooking. When you get most of that in, you just go ahead and stir it in. Now, this part, we're going to put it again back over a fairly low heat. It would be nice, the temptation is to turn the heat up because you don't want to have to stir it very long. But if you do that, because the flour is only suspended here until it actually thickens up, the flour is going to start to settle to the bottom, and if you're not stirring constantly, then it's going to lump on you. And if you cook it at too high a temperature, then it's not going to work as well either, because the flour is not going to have a gentle, slow heat and allow for each of the flour particles to swell, absorb the liquid, and cause that gelation to form. So we want to do this fairly slowly. It may take 10 to 15 minutes. Once you've let it come to a simmer, let it simmer for about 2 minutes to get rid of any of the rest of that raw flour taste. Then turn off your heat, and we're going to add to that half a cup of sharp cheddar cheese. Now this was reduced from 1 cup of cheddar cheese, and I did use fat-free milk also, by the way, as opposed to whole milk that the original recipe called for. Just stir this in until it's nice and melted. And you can still see the pepper, but we're going to put it in over the broccoli and other things too that are going to cause some change in it, and so I don't think you're going to notice particularly where the speckles come from. Just pour that over. Try and get around the edges too so that the whole thing is coated. I'll try not to lose the saucepan here. And spread that out a little bit. Now the sharp cheddar cheese, we use less because it has so much more flavor than regular cheddar cheese does. It does have more fat content, but because we use less, we end up with less fat overall. The next step is we're going to make a little bit of a topping with this. I have a cup of soft breadcrumbs, and I really would recommend probably either white bread or bread that pretty much looks like is white but just looks a little bit brown to do this. And then I have 2 tablespoons of melted butter, and the original recipe called for 3, and the little bit of sauce we have on here is not going to be a problem. And we're going to just kind of spread that out, sprinkle it around. If it's easier to use your fingers, you could do that. But spread it out over the top so that you don't have to cover the whole thing. We're just kind of giving more of an illusion here of crumbs that are out there rather than some dishes which traditionally have so many crumbs on them that you can't see what's underneath. And then the last thing we're going to add to this is about 1/4 of a cup of Parmesan cheese. And spread that out over the top. Now then we're going to put this in a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes. Now if you're doing this ahead of time, which you could very well do, at this stage cover it with some saran and some aluminum foil and put it in your refrigerator. You could leave it in the refrigerator for about 24 hours or so, and then you can go ahead and bake it. But instead of the 30 minutes, you're going to want to do 35 to 45 minutes until it gets bubbly and heated all the way through. And at this stage that would go in the oven. And we have one here that I've already gotten cooked for you. And you can see that we get that nice brownness on the top for the crumbs. And this is a great dish for a potluck, for a family dish. You could cut the recipe in half and just make half of it. Instead of 32 ounces of broccoli, you could just use 1 pound. It also would work very well if you're like me and you always like what you take to the potluck, but you're afraid there won't be any left. This works great because you can take half the recipe to the potluck and still remember that when you get home, you've got half of it left for lunch the next day. I hope you'll try this. It's called antique broccoli. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.